but we are now recording. Yeah, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. So I guess the first question, I was listening to one of the speeches or reading a readout of the speech that Ayatollah that he gave. I think this was yesterday or the day before yesterday. And he pointed out that Iran has never needed a proxy in the sense, whether it be Hezbollah, whether it be Hamas, and that for all intents and purposes that these groups are acting out of their best interests, not necessarily because they're doing it for Iran. But what do you make of people who say that Iran has been somewhat damaged in this process, or at the very least the groups that were affiliated with Iran, either from the standpoint of Hezbollah, either from the isolation of Gaza, or for that matter, the amelioration of Syria, that all of these things have damaged Iran in a way, even with Israel saying that they want to now attack Iran directly, feeling that they have gained some level of success. Give me your thoughts on that. What would you say to people who say stuff like that?
First of all, Iran doesn't have proxies. They want to diminish the importance of these groups, the fact that they have agency, the fact that they're liberation organizations by using such terminology. Hezbollah is a liberation organization. It liberated Lebanon from the Israeli occupation, which started in 1982. They took the capital, Beirut, and by the year 2000, they kicked them out of the country. Hamas is a Palestinian group, and so is Islamic Jihad, and they are struggling to preserve Palestine, to save Palestine. Ansarullah in Yemen, they too are a liberation organization, and they are defending the people of Palestine. So all of these groups, whether in Iraq or Yemen or Lebanon or Palestine, they're all uh, liberation organizations that have agency, that are supporting the people of Palestine. And the Israeli regime has been battered. They did not gain any victory in Gaza nor in Lebanon. They slaughtered many innocent people. They carried out a genocide in Gaza. They slaughtered many ordinary Lebanese. But on the battlefield, they didn't get what they set out to do. In Lebanon, they're stuck on the border after a couple of months of very heavy fighting. And in Gaza, the resistance is still fighting. The only place where the Israeli regime did have success is in Syria, where the Israeli regime, Netanyahu, Biden, and Erdogan undermined the sovereignty of the state. And I think that is definitely a setback for the resistance because Syria has been a country which allowed resistance organizations to be supported through. But I don't think that Al Qaeda will be able to rule over Syria. And I don't think, despite the efforts of Erdogan and Netanyahu, that the Syrian people will accept subjugation under Al Qaeda. And it's extraordinary that the Americans consider the victory of the deputy head of ISIS, the former deputy head of ISIS, and the head of Al Qaeda uh, in Syria as an achievement. These are the same people who carried out 9/11. These are the same people who carried out terror attacks across the world in the UK, what the British call 7/7, or the Manchester bombing. And it's quite extraordinary that today the Western media is whitewashing this organization. I don't think that is a success for the West. I don't think it's a success for the people of Turkey or Turkey. But at the moment, I do consider what has happened in Syria to be a setback. But I don't think that things will end as they are.
I agree with you. It's dark, to put it mildly. I mean, the notion that we are thinking that this is a great thing. I mean, in the US, they have been running with this as if it's some success, as if it's a democracy. And as you pointed out, these were the people that were carrying out terrorist attacks, but now they are trying to whitewash all of it. From the standpoint of Syria, you pointed out that you don't believe that Al Qaeda was be able to hold Syria together. What are your expectations for Syria? I mean, are you expecting it to basically fracture, for it to end up something to semblance of Libya and for Iraq? What are your expectations for Syria going forward?
Well, I hope it doesn't fragment, but I do think that the people of Syria are witnessing this external conspiracy. And those people who were euphoric at the beginning, that segment of society, I think gradually they're seeing the reality. They're seeing their country being bombed day and night, its infrastructure being destroyed. They're seeing that Mr. Erdogan is not protecting them against the Israeli regime. And they are seeing that these extremists are beginning to kill and suppress people who don't look like them or think like them. So, despite the fake images given by the Western media, things inside Syria are not good at all. And I should also add that Netanyahu may feel that he has scored a victory in Syria, but I think that the Israeli regime has already lost. They've lost in Gaza, as I said earlier, they lost in Lebanon. Most importantly, their image has been shattered across the world. They're despised for carrying out this Holocaust in Gaza, for the genocidal strikes in Lebanon, and it hasn't gone unnoticed outside of the West that they are supporting Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. So I don't think this is a win for the Israeli regime. It is a win for Netanyahu and his Zionist supporters and Zionists in general, who um, who I think are very uh, uh, foolish in thinking that things will end well for the Israeli regime.
What's wild to me is that they are effectively side by side with the terrorist state. And I keep asking myself, are they really that comfortable being beside a state like this that is, for all intents and purposes, ISIS, Al Qaeda, etc.? I mean, from your take on this, do you think they should really be that comfortable beside Al Jilani and his Turkish back jihadists in this particular country like this, especially at some point? I mean, for example, one of the reports that came out recently was that ISIS was making a resurgence. And there's this other question that if the Turkish backed rebels are able to take down some of the Kurdish forces, that there's a prison filled with thousands of ISIS fighters that are just waiting to be unleashed if they're released. Is Israel in a safe, comfortable spot in this? I don't see it. For me, I don't necessarily think they are, but they seem to have a different take on this. What's yours?
I don't think any country in the region should feel safe. Turkey, first and foremost, because this extremist culture uh, can make inroads into Turkey. It already has since 2011. It has had an impact on Turkish society and culture, and Turkey has traditionally been uh, a Sufist society, deeply influenced by Sufism. That's what makes it very similar to Iran. But we have seen changes already. So now you have an euphoric Al Qaeda and their affiliates. That will have an impact. It will have an impact on countries, dictatorships across the region that are in the American camp. They do have people there who have similar views, and that could create instability. And if there is instability in these countries, then that is definitely not good news for the Israeli regime. So, ironically, the countries that are most vulnerable are those that are in the American camp. And a country like Iran is not vulnerable to this extremist ideology because Iran completely opposes it. But the Israelis and Erdogan and NATO and some of the countries in the Persian Gulf, these oil and gas rich dictatorships, they've been supporting these groups since 2011. But I think many of them are already starting to get worried. We already see that Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, and others are beginning to see that now that they've actually come to power, that they are a threat to their own societies.
The other questions I have on this: has the relationship between Turkey and Iran been damaged by all of this? I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's clear as day. Erdogan is trying to act as if he has nothing to do with the rebels or the terrorists that have taken over Syria. But everyone else knows, regardless of what he is trying to say or insinuate. Has the relationship between Iran and Turkey been damaged by all of this?
I think it's fair to say that the relationship between many countries and Erdogan and his people have been damaged. We can see from voices inside China that the Chinese are very unhappy that Erdogan is using Chinese terrorists. Central Asian countries uh, have passport holders of theirs fighting as terrorists, as Al Qaeda, being trained by Erdogan and his people. In Syria, the Russians, the Iranians, as I said, some of the countries, Arab countries in the Western camp, they are all unhappy. And I think Mr. Erdogan has miscalculated. I actually don't think he thought that his terror organizations would actually take Syria. I think he was hoping that they could move close to Aleppo and then he could have some leverage against the Syrian government. But the collapse of Syria, I think, came just as much a surprise to him as it was just as much a surprise to him as it was to anyone else.
That breeds the question, why did Syria collapse in the way that it collapsed? Meaning, how did it go down that fast? Because I got to be honest, nobody expected it. And everybody that I brought onto the show were just shocked, like completely shocked. From your take on this, what happened? How did it go down in the way that it go down?
Well, I think it's clear the barbaric sanctions, the Caesar Act, which was meant to starve Syrians. The West starved Syria. They crushed Syrian society. They waged war against women and children for well over a decade now. And then the Americans stole or occupied roughly 40% of Syria, and they've been stealing their oil and their agricultural products because the northeast of Syria is their agricultural heartland. So on the one hand, they starve Syrians, and then on the other, they steal their resources. And you had Erdogan and his terrorists constantly making trouble in the north, and the Israeli regime bombing from the south. So how much can a country take under such painful circumstances? And so Syria is broken. But the problem, I think, for Mr. Erdogan is that now he has to take care of this country. He and Qatar and basically these two are going to have to fund, because I don't think the Europeans have that much extra cash, and I don't think the Americans are going to pay for anything. So Doha and Ankara will have to deal with the financial crisis. They're going to have to deal with all these hungry Syrians. The Iranians, until now, have been sending more than 1 million barrels of oil a month. That will stop now, and it has stopped. And the Russians have been sending grain and fuel as well. They'll stop that too because they're neither are welcome there. So not only will Turkey and Doha have to replace and replace Iran and Russia, but they're going to have to do whole lot more because the country is in chaos. And then you have these crazy Al Qaeda people who want to govern the country. They want to take care of healthcare and higher education and industry and uh, run cities. I don't think that is going to happen. And at the same time, they're antagonizing um, Christians, Kurds, Alawites, uh, middle class and educated Sunnis, Shias. I don't think it's going to end well for them, but we'll have to see.
One of the other questions that I had on this one, I mean, from my understanding, Russia, and for that matter, Iran, had been given indications, or at the very least reporting, is that they were given indications to Assad that he needs to respond, that there was a terrorist organization that was being, basically, that they were being emboldened, that they were being more aggressive, and that there were reports that there was going to be an attack. And it seemed that he was slow to respond. And again, I'm posing this more so as a question more than anything else. Did you see it that way? Did you see him as being slow to respond? If he was slow to respond, why was he slow to respond to the warnings that were coming out of Moscow and Tehran over this issue?
Well, in recent years, he was distancing himself from Iran, and most of the Iranians left Syria. And he moved closer to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, hoping that they will help him deal with the sanctions and support him against Erdogan. But I think it's clear now that that was a miscalculation, and it should have been clear to him back then. For the Iranians, what is important is that extremist groups, terrorist groups, don't win in Syria. From the very beginning, the reason why the Iranians entered Syria was not because they were huge fans of the ruling class in Syria, but it was because Al Qaeda and ISIS and Jaish al Islam and all of these other uh, terrorist organizations supported by NATO and their regional proxies, that they were definitely a much greater threat to the people of Syria and the region than the previous government in Syria. And I think we will see that the people of Syria will be paying the price for what Mr. Erdogan and Biden and, of course, the Netanyahu regime have done.
Last two questions. True Promise 3. Some people have made the point of saying it was a mistake for Iran to hesitate in going for True Promise 3 while all of the other conflicts were taking place, either between Gaza and Israel, Hezbollah and Israel. Give me your take on that. Why did True Promise 3, why was it being delayed? And is it still something that Iran is anticipating launching after everything has effectively taken place in Syria?
MS3 wouldn't have affected what happened in Syria. So I don't think um, a valid argument for some people to make. And the expectation is that Iran will carry out True Promise 3, but Iran also has to beef up its air defenses because the Americans they have to be taken into consideration. If the Americans make the foolish move and try to join the Israeli regime in airstrikes, Iran has to have stronger air defenses and also um, uh, have a very effective offensive capability. Iran's offensive capability, its missiles and drones are adequate. Its air defenses are adequate for the Israeli regime, but I think they're probably preparing themselves more just in case the Americans make a foolish mistake. But in general, things have changed because of Syria. New calculations are being made, but my understanding is that True Promise 3 is something that will ultimately be carried out.
What are those new calculations? I mean, if things have changed, and look, I think everybody agrees with you on that front that things clearly have changed in the Middle East. But what are the new calculations that are being made now that Syria has effectively fallen? Give me your take on this.
Exactly it. Syrian airspace is no longer protected by air defenses at all. So it is open space for the Americans and the Israelis, and that will have an impact on any strike against Iran. So Iran has to prepare itself for an operation that may use Syrian airspace as much as it uses Jordanian airspace. And of course, the Americans are also present in the Persian Gulf region. So Iran has to be prepared for all those potential strikes from all of those areas.
Thank you for this. Well, Professor, thank you for this. Honestly, I know there was a lot of technical glitches and everything else, but I really do appreciate you sticking it out, and thank you for this interview.